Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are diving deep into the fascinating story of the Washington quarter dollar, a coin that most people overlook in their daily lives, but which holds an extraordinary place in American history, art, and numismatics, because the Washington quarter was never meant to be just another circulating coin. It was created as a national tribute to George Washington, the founding father whose leadership shaped the birth of the United States. And understanding this coin begins long before the first quarter was ever struck, going back to the early 1930s when the country was still struggling through the Great Depression and Americans were searching for symbols of unity, stability, and pride. And at that time the U.S. government planned a special commemorative coin to mark the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth in 1932, originally intending it to be a one-year issue, similar to earlier commemorative coins, but the design was so well received and the need to replace the worn standing Liberty quarter was so urgent that the commemorative idea evolved into a permanent redesign, giving birth to the Washington quarter dollar as a regular circulating coin. And this decision would quietly shape American pocket change for generations to come, because once the design entered circulation, it quickly became one of the most recognized coins in the nation. And the man selected to design the new quarter was sculptor John Flanagan, whose portrait of Washington was based on a famous bust by Jean-Antoine Houdon, widely regarded as the most accurate likeness of Washington created during his lifetime. And this artistic choice gave the quarter a sense of realism and dignity that resonated deeply with the public, as Washington's calm yet commanding profile symbolized leadership, restraint, and national unity at a time when the country desperately needed reassurance. And when the first Washington quarters were struck in 1932 at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, they were composed of 90% silver and 10% copper, giving them intrinsic value that collectors still cherish today. And these early issues immediately became part of everyday commerce, passing through countless hands during one of the most economically challenging periods in American history, which explains why high-grade survivors from the early years are so rare and valuable today, because most were heavily circulated, used to buy food, pay rent, and survive daily life. And this real-world usage is precisely what makes the Washington quarter such a powerful historical artifact, because each coin carries silent stories of the era in which it circulated. And as production continued through the 1930s and into the wartime 1940s, the Washington quarter became a constant presence in American life, witnessing the nation's mobilization for World War II, the sacrifices of civilians and soldiers alike, and the transformation of the U.S. economy into a global powerhouse. And during these years the United States Mint faced enormous pressure to produce massive quantities of coinage while conserving strategic metals for the war effort, which sometimes resulted in weaker strikes or minor production inconsistencies that collectors now study with intense interest. And as the decades progressed, the Washington quarter continued to evolve alongside the nation, remaining silver through 1964, a fact that today makes all pre-1965 quarters especially desirable to collectors and investors, because they represent the end of an era when everyday money contained precious metal. And when silver prices began to rise sharply in the early 1960s, Americans started hoarding silver coins, unknowingly creating future rarities in high condition. And this shift eventually forced the mint to change the composition of the quarter in 1965 to a copper-nickel clad format, forever altering the character of the coin. Yet even with this change, the Washington quarter never lost its identity or importance, because the design continued to honor Washington and serve as a canvas for new ideas, later becoming the foundation for massive programs like the State Quarter Series, which introduced millions of people to coin collecting for the first time. And through all these transformations, the Washington quarter has remained a bridge between history and modern life, between silver and clad, between artistry and mass production. And in this video series we are not just looking at a coin, we are uncovering a living timeline of American history told through metal, design, and circulation, revealing why the Washington quarter dollar is far more than spare change, and why collectors around the world continue to study it, search for it, and treasure it, because every Washington quarter, no matter how common it may seem, carries the weight of nearly a century of history, national pride, and numismatic fascination. The story of the Washington quarter dollar deepens even further when we look closely at how the coin was actually produced, distributed, and received by the American public after its introduction, because once the initial excitement of the 1932 release settled, the quarter quickly became an everyday workhorse of the U.S. economy, circulating widely across cities, small towns, farms, factories, and military bases. And this widespread use is exactly why truly high-grade early Washington quarters are so elusive today, as most examples were used heavily during a time when people depended on every coin they had. And during the early years the United States Mint struck quarters at three main facilities: Philadelphia with no mint mark, Denver with a D, and San Francisco with an S, each mint producing coins with subtle differences in strike quality, luster, and detail that modern collectors study very carefully, because these differences often determine whether a coin is worth face value, melt value, or thousands of dollars at auction. And one of the most fascinating aspects of early Washington quarters is how inconsistent the strikes could be, especially on the reverse where the eagle's breast feathers often appear weak or flat, a characteristic that is not always due to wear but rather to shallow dies or insufficient striking pressure. And this has created an entire subspecialty within Washington quarter collecting focused on full strike examples, where all design details are sharp and fully brought up, and such coins command massive premiums in high mint state grades, especially from the 1930s and early 1940s, and as the nation moved through World War II, the Washington quarter took on an even more symbolic role, because it circulated alongside ration books, war bonds, and patriotic propaganda, becoming part of daily life during one of the most defining periods in American history. And although the composition remained 90% silver, the mint was under constant pressure to conserve resources and maintain output, which sometimes resulted in lower overall quality, making top-condition wartime quarters particularly scarce today. And after the war, as the U.S. economy boomed in the late 1940s and 1950s, quarter production increased dramatically to meet the needs of a growing population, expanding suburbs, and a consumer-driven economy. And while mintages soared, collectors must remember that high mintage does not automatically mean high survival in top condition, because many coins were still heavily circulated, stored improperly, or melted decades later when silver prices surged. And this is why even seemingly common dates can become extremely valuable in gem condition with strong luster and clean surfaces. And beyond condition rarity, the Washington Quarter Series is also rich in varieties and errors that tell the behind-the-scenes story of coin production, including doubled dies created when the hub impressed the die more than once at slightly different angles, repunched mint marks applied by hand in earlier years, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and other mint errors that escaped quality control and entered circulation, each one serving as a tangible reminder that coins are industrial products made by people and machines, not perfect objects, and collectors who take the time to learn these details often discover that value hides in plain sight, sometimes in a coin that others would dismiss as ordinary. And throughout all of this, the constant presence of George Washington on the obverse reinforces the coin's role as a symbol of stability and continuity, as generations of Americans used the same design through economic hardship, global conflict, and post-war prosperity. And this continuity is one of the reasons the Washington Quarter remains so beloved among collectors, because it offers an unbroken narrative that spans decades, allowing anyone to build a collection that reflects nearly the entire modern history of the United States. And as we move forward in this series, understanding these production realities, historical contexts, and subtle differences is essential, because they form the foundation for identifying key dates, rare varieties, and truly valuable Washington quarters, proving that this coin is not just spare change, but a detailed historical record struck in silver and metal, waiting for collectors to study, preserve, and appreciate. As we move deeper into the Washington quarter dollar story, it becomes essential to understand how rarity and value are shaped not just by age, but by a complex combination of mintages, survival rates, condition, and collector demand, because many beginners assume that old automatically means valuable, yet the Washington Quarter Series proves that this is only partially true, since millions of quarters were struck every year and only a small percentage survived in collectible condition. Especially from the silver era between 1932 and 1964, when quarters circulated heavily and were rarely saved by the public. And during these decades the United States Mint produced Washington quarters in enormous quantities to fuel a rapidly expanding economy, but production numbers alone do not tell the full story. Because what truly matters is how many coins remain today in high grades such as Mint State 65 or higher, and this is where condition rarity becomes the defining factor, as coins that look nearly perfect despite being decades old are exponentially rarer than worn examples, and collectors pay extraordinary premiums for these survivors, especially when they display strong luster, clean surfaces, and sharp details on Washington's hair and the eagle's feathers. And one of the most important transitions in the series occurred in 1965, when rising silver prices forced the U.S. government to remove silver from circulating coinage, replacing it with a copper-nickel clad composition, a change that fundamentally altered how collectors approached the Washington Quarter, because from that point forward, value was no longer tied to precious metal content but almost entirely to condition, errors, and varieties. And while many people dismissed clad quarters as common and uninteresting, advanced collectors recognized early on that high-grade clad quarters would one day become scarce due to poor storage, bag marks, and weak strikes, especially from the late 1960s and 1970s, when mint quality control was inconsistent and coins were produced rapidly to meet demand, and this is why today certain clad Washington quarters in superb gem condition can be surprisingly valuable, even without any silver content, and beyond condition, the Washington Quarter Series is famous for key dates that stand out due to low mintages or poor survival rates, with the 1932D and 1932S being the most well-known, as these coins were struck in relatively small numbers during the depths of the Great Depression and circulated extensively, leaving few high-grade examples available to collectors today, and these key dates anchor the entire series, often representing the biggest challenge for anyone attempting a complete date and mint set, and as collectors move through later decades, they encounter semi-key dates where value spikes dramatically in higher grades, teaching an important lesson about population reports and market dynamics, because a coin that is common in worn condition may be extremely rare in mint state, and this reality becomes even more pronounced when we examine varieties and errors, which introduce an entirely new dimension of scarcity, including doubled die obverse where lettering or Washington's profile appears doubled, repunched mint marks from the era when mint marks were applied by hand, and dramatic mint errors such as off-center strikes or clipped planchets that capture the imagination of both novice and advanced collectors alike, and these coins often command strong premiums because they represent mistakes that escaped the minting process, offering a glimpse into the industrial realities behind coin production, and throughout all these variations and transitions, the image of George Washington remains a constant, providing continuity across decades of economic change, technological advancement, and shifting public attitudes toward money and collecting. And this consistency is one of the greatest strengths of the Washington Quarter Series, because it allows collectors to build knowledge progressively, learning how to evaluate strike quality, luster, grading, and rarity within a single design framework, and by understanding these factors in depth, collectors gain the ability to look beyond face value and recognize coins that carry true numismatic significance, proving that the Washington Quarter Dollar is not merely a common circulating coin, but a sophisticated and rewarding series that continues to challenge, educate, and inspire collectors around the world. When collectors move beyond basic dates and mint marks, the Washington Quarter Dollar reveals an advanced and highly rewarding layer of numismatic depth centered on varieties, errors, grading nuances, and market psychology, because this series has been studied intensely for decades, and as a result, even small differences in strike quality or surface preservation can mean the difference between a common coin and a five-figure rarity, and one of the most critical concepts to understand is grading, since Washington quarters are notoriously difficult to find in true gem condition due to heavy bag marks, weak strikes, and luster breaks, especially on the high points of George Washington's hair and cheek, which are often the first areas to show friction or contact marks, and this is why professional grading by third-party services plays such a major role in the value of top-tier examples, because collectors rely on consistency, population reports, and market trust when paying large sums, and as coins are submitted and certified, population data reveals an important truth. Many dates that appear common on paper are actually extremely rare in mint state 66 or 67, particularly from the 1940s and 1950s, when quarters were produced in massive numbers but handled carelessly in large mint bags, resulting in abrasions that permanently limited the number of high-grade survivors, and this phenomenon has created intense competition among registry set collectors who are willing to pay strong premiums to secure the finest known examples, pushing prices higher year after year, and alongside condition rarity, the Washington Quarter Series is rich in varieties that reward careful study, especially double dies that occurred when the hub impressed the die more than once at slightly different alignments, causing visible doubling on letters like Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date. And these varieties are highly sought after because they are true minting anomalies rather than post-mint damage, and similarly, repunched mint marks from earlier years add another layer of collectability, as mint marks were hand-punched into working dies, sometimes multiple times, leaving behind overlapping or misplaced impressions that specialists eagerly hunt for, and beyond varieties, dramatic mint errors bring an entirely different audience into the Washington quarter market, including off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, and wrong planchet errors where quarters were accidentally struck on foreign or incorrect metal blanks, each error serving as physical evidence of a moment when the production process failed, allowing collectors to hold a unique artifact that exists outside normal mint specifications, and these errors are especially appealing because no two are exactly alike, making them miniature one-of-a-kind pieces of mint history, and all of these elements, condition rarity, varieties, and errors, are directly tied to how the United States Mint operated during different eras, reflecting changes in technology, labor practices, and quality control standards, and as we move into the modern era with programs like the State Quarter Series, Collectors sometimes forget that the original Washington quarter design laid the groundwork for this explosion of interest in circulating coinage, proving that a single, enduring design could be both functional money and a canvas for history, education, and national identity, and today the Washington quarter. Market continues to evolve as new discoveries are made, hoards are dispersed, and population reports shift, reminding collectors that numismatics is not static but dynamic, influenced by research, demand, and the constant reevaluation of what truly constitutes rarity. And for those willing to study the series deeply, the Washington quarter offers endless opportunities to learn, search, and uncover value where others see only pocket change, reinforcing its status as one of the most intellectually satisfying and historically rich coin series ever produced. As the Washington quarter dollar enters its later chapters, the story expands beyond traditional collecting and into the broader cultural, economic, and educational impact the coin has had on generations of Americans, because by the time the original silver issues ended in 1964, the Washington quarter had already cemented itself as one of the most familiar objects in everyday life. A coin that nearly every citizen handled countless times without ever stopping to consider its history or significance, and yet this familiarity is exactly what allowed the quarter to become a powerful teaching tool, introducing millions of people to history, geography, and civic pride, especially as the design continued into the clad era and later served as the foundation for massive circulating commemorative programs. And through all these changes, the calm, dignified portrait of George Washington remained a constant, quietly reinforcing national identity and continuity even as the world around it changed at a rapid pace. And one of the most important turning points in the modern history of the Washington quarter came in 1999 with the launch of the State Quarters Program, an ambitious initiative by the United States Mint that transformed the quarter from a simple denomination into a nationwide educational phenomenon. As each state was honored with its own reverse design in the order it ratified the Constitution or joined the Union, and this program sparked an unprecedented wave of public interest in coin collecting, drawing in children, families, teachers, and casual hobbyists who began searching their change for new designs, filling albums, and learning about American history in a hands-on way. And although these state quarters are often considered common today, their cultural impact cannot be overstated, because they revived interest in circulating coinage at a time when cash usage was already beginning to decline, and they demonstrated the power of thoughtful design. To engage the public, and beyond the state series, the Washington quarter continued to evolve through subsequent programs such as America the Beautiful, which highlighted national parks and natural landmarks, further reinforcing the quarter's role as a storytelling medium rather than just a piece of money. And from a collector's perspective, these modern issues introduced new challenges and opportunities. Because while mintages were high, condition rarity once again became the key factor, with high-grade examples, especially from circulation strikes, proving surprisingly difficult to find due to poor handling, storage, and distribution. And this reality mirrors the lessons learned from earlier decades, reminding collectors that even modern coins can become rare and valuable when preserved in exceptional condition. And as time moves forward, the Washington quarter also serves as a bridge between generations of collectors, connecting those who focus on classic silver issues with those who specialize in modern varieties, errors, and top population registry coins, creating a shared foundation of knowledge and appreciation. And perhaps most importantly, the Washington quarter embodies the idea that money is not just an economic tool but a cultural artifact, reflecting the values, priorities, and artistic sensibilities of the society that produces it. And by studying this coin in depth, collectors gain insight not only into numismatics but into the broader story of the United States itself, from economic hardship to prosperity, from tradition to innovation. And as we approach the final chapter of this series, it becomes clear that the Washington quarter dollar is far more than a common coin. It is a living archive of American history, art, and collective memory, still circulating, still being collected, and still inspiring curiosity nearly a century after its introduction. As we reach the final stage of the Washington quarter dollar journey, the focus naturally turns to legacy, long-term collectability, and why this coin continues to matter so deeply in an age increasingly dominated by digital transactions. Because while many modern forms of money exist only as numbers on a screen, the Washington quarter remains a tangible link to nearly a century of American life, passed hand to hand through generations, carrying with it stories of economic struggle, national pride, artistic evolution, and personal discovery. And one of the most compelling aspects of this coin is how it continues to reward patience and knowledge, since collectors who study the series closely often find that value emerges not overnight but gradually, as market tastes evolve, population reports change, and once overlooked coins gain recognition for their true scarcity, particularly in the highest grades where competition among advanced collectors is fierce. And this is especially true 4 early silver issues from the 1930s and 1940s, where subtle differences in strike quality, luster, and surface preservation can multiply a coin's value many times over, turning an ordinary-looking quarter into a centerpiece of a serious collection. And yet the beauty of the Washington quarter is that it remains accessible, because unlike many classic U.S. coins that are now prohibitively expensive, this series allows collectors to enter at any level, from circulated silver examples purchased for their metal content to elite registry quality coins certified at the highest grades, and this wide range of entry points has helped sustain interest in the series decade after decade, ensuring that new collectors are always discovering it for the first time. And beyond financial value, the Washington quarter carries immense educational significance, as it teaches collectors how to evaluate condition, understand minting technology, recognize varieties and errors, and appreciate the historical context behind design changes, mint decisions, and production challenges, all of which are essential skills that transfer to virtually every other area of numismatics. And this educational role is amplified by the fact that the same obverse portrait of George Washington connects classic silver quarters, modern clad issues, and commemorative programs into one continuous narrative, reinforcing the idea that coin collecting is not about isolated objects but about understanding progression over time. And when viewed through this lens, the Washington quarter becomes a masterclass in American coinage, reflecting shifts in metal composition, artistic priorities, public engagement, and even national psychology, as seen in how designs were used to promote unity, celebrate geography, and honor shared heritage. And institutions like the United States Mint continue to build upon this foundation, proving that the quarter remains one of the most powerful and flexible denominations in U.S. history, capable of carrying meaning far beyond its face value. And for collectors today, the Washington quarter offers something increasingly rare in the modern world: a sense of continuity, a reminder that everyday objects can hold extraordinary stories, and that with curiosity and dedication, even the most familiar coin can reveal layers of history and value that others overlook. And as the years pass and fewer people use physical currency, surviving high-quality Washington quarters, especially those preserved with care, are likely to become even more significant, not only as collectibles but as artifacts of a fading era, ensuring that the Washington quarter dollar will continue to be studied, admired, and sought after long into the future, standing as a lasting symbol of American history struck in metal and carried through time. And thanks for watching.